Well, it's that time of the week, that time of the day, and can you believe it's show 14 already, Dan Rafael in America? Can you believe
Yes,
we've done 13 shows and we're on our 14th show already?
You know, I think that's pretty cool. I mean, we didn't have any plans for this in any meaningful way when the lockdowns began, but we've been having a good time. We get great response from our viewers and our social media followers, get some questions. I get I busted out a new hat for you today.
Come on, let's see it.
Showtime Championship Boxing.
Nice, nice.
And the reason for this is because I joined my good friends Kieran Mulvaney and Eric Raskin on their Showtime Boxing podcast, which was audio, but it was audio only, but we filmed it via Zoom, but I didn't know that at the time, and I told them that just because of that, I was going to break out a Showtime hat. So there we go, Showtime Championship Boxing. Hopefully they'll be back in action soon enough.
No, I had a little spin with Eric Raskin and Kieran Mulvaney a few weeks back on the anniversary of Ricky Hatton's fight with Kostya Tszyu. I know that they're old timers like us in the boxing world. Those two.
They're good dudes.
And also, of course, Showtime Boxing may be back this month because we're in July now. I know they're talking about it. Saturday night fights with Bellator on a Friday in the same CBS lot. Studio lot in Los Angeles. So hopefully, you know, there'll be some kind of announcement soon.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to necessarily see a Showtime Championship Boxing in July, but certainly their plans are at least something, you know, this summer, hopefully at least by August, obviously.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect it to be some big, huge fight, but I know they've been looking to try to, at the very least, reschedule, like they had an Otto Whalen heavyweight fight prior to the pandemic that also included Luis Neri on the undercard. So I think they'll try to reschedule some element of that show. But, you know, the good thing about what Showtime is doing, they're not reliant on sports programming. It's just one of their many things that they put their resources towards. So hopefully there'll be some money there for the second half of the year, and we'll get, at the very least, you know, at least a couple of more significant fights, even if there are no crowds allowed.
Because they were talking about having 4, 5, or 6 through the summer, but it's about organising that lot, organising the money, and aligning it with Bellator, because obviously that's one of their properties as well, Bellator MMA, the Mixed Martial Arts Organization, which I work with as well. So I'm waiting on news on that as well, and I'm chasing them every few days. But things are definitely speeding up. I mean, Golden Boy Promotions announcing 2 events, and Eddie Hearn is flying to the US, or he may be on his way there now to announce a show, Dan.
I don't know if he's actually coming here for a news conference or anything like that. That's probably not going to happen. But the reality,
no, he is. He's saying he is. He's saying he's getting on a plane to host the press conference.
Well, there's going to definitely be, you know, these 3 shows that were announced just in the last couple of days. 2 Golden Boy events, 1 in July, 1 in August, and then Eddie's return of boxing in terms of Matchroom USA, also taking place in the month of August 15th. Those 3 events also coincide with the return of American-based boxing on Dezurn. Now, Dezurn, of course, will stream Eddie's Matchroom cards that are going to take place, you know, in the backyard in the big mansion outside of London. But these are events that will take place in America. So you have, you know, some good name fighters on there. Eddie's card, you know, granted it's not the biggest show in the history of the world, but they're starting off with a couple of title fights. It's going to take place outdoors in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the main event is Julio Cesar Martinez, very exciting flyweight champion, who'll make his second defense. He looked, you know, had a terrific fight against your countryman Jay Harris down in Frisco, Texas, on the undercard of the Jesse Vargas, Mikey Garcia fight that took place in late February. But anyway, so he'll defend the title against McWilliams Arroyo, a well-known contender in the main event. The undercard fight co-feature is a rescheduled bout between the undisputed women's world champion at welterweight, Cecilia Braekhus, probably the best women's fighter in boxing, and she's going to defend against the women's junior welterweight title holder who's moving up in weight, Jessica McCaskill. This is one of those fights, Garrett, that was, as you know, supposed to take place on the undercard of the Maurice Hooker-Regis Prograis fight back in April, but that was obviously postponed because of what happened with the virus. Unfortunately, that main event is not going to be rescheduled, but the Braekhus fight is being rescheduled. She's a fantastic fighter. And not that you can compare women's boxing and men's boxing, it's apples to oranges, but just from the sheer stats, just from the numbers point of view, if she wins the fight, Braekhus, it will be her 26th consecutive welterweight title defense, which would break the record of Joe Louis, who made 25 defenses of the heavyweight title, which is the most in any division in the history of boxing. Again, They're not fighting the same level of competition. I'm not trying to say Cecilia and Joe Louis are one and the same by any stretch of the imagination, but just in terms of the sheer numbers, I don't care what gender you are, what weight class you're in. You defend your world title 26 consecutive times. That's a big deal, and she's already done it 25 times. She's a Hall of Famer when she's done fighting, and she's coming near the end. So if you want to catch Cecilia Braekhus, you probably should check out her fight. McCaskill doesn't have a great record, but she's an exciting fighter, and she's got a big heart. She's she's younger than Cecilia, so look, it should be a solid fight.
Well, British fans know Jessica because of Katie Taylor, of course. Two things I'd like to...
I was going to say one other thing, just real quick to cover them. The two Golden Boy shows, you got Jorge Linares coming back against Fortuna, which means Fortuna will not be fighting Luke Campbell, which was sort of the assumed situation. That fight is not going to take place. That's the one Golden Boy main event. And the other one is a rescheduled fight between Virgil Ortiz Jr., the undefeated welterweight, 15-0 with 15 knockouts. He's in the main event against Samuel Vargas, another one of the fights that had originally been scheduled for earlier this year, but was knocked off the schedule because of the pandemic. And so they're getting that fight back together. That might not be the most competitive fight in the world, but if you're a boxing fan, Virgil Ortiz is one of those guys you got to watch. He's a fantastic up-and-coming star.
Well, there's three things here. Obviously, Martinez was over here and beat Charlie Edwards, although that was annulled, wasn't it? Because of the blow to Edwards when he was down here. I was there covering radio and Telegraph that night. Martinez, for me, everybody, please look out for him if you haven't seen him yet. He is a spiteful little man in the ring. And I mean that in the ultimate praise and glow for the guy. I mean, and he's just getting started in many ways. I think he could turn out to be one of the very new and exciting fighters of this kind of new era, if you like, post-pandemic. He's got real fast twitch fibers about him. He's a very aggressive fighter. He's got a great chin, an incredible physique, and he looks like he can just keep that weight. He's a natural sized man down there in that division. I'm very excited by him, and Hearn was very smart to sign him after he fought Edwards, in my view.
His people have talked about defending the title at flyweight, maybe unifying titles at flyweight. There was some discussion on the Martinez camp anyway that he would unify against Delakian from Ukraine. I talked to the Ukraine team that represents Delakian and wrote a piece about that for Boxing Scene. They said that was absolutely not true. There was nothing to it. But those are the types of fights that Martinez would like. Delakian would like that fight also, by the way. Just it was logistically not possible to take place. But the point is, Martinez's people have also talked about, going up to the 115-pound division and trying to make some noise there. And as you and I know, and everybody knows that follows this thing, at 115 pounds, there's a lot of good talent, whether it's Chocolatito Gonzalez, Juan Francisco Estrada, Sarung Visai. I mean, there's
so many of them.
A lot of good names up there. So if Martinez can keep on doing his thing at flyweight, get a couple more defenses under his belt, maybe make a little bit of a bigger name, he may be able to do something and make a bigger fight in the heavier weight class. But the point is, we have these three events between the Golden Boy, two fights, two events they've announced, Eddie's return to the United States for his Matchroom card. It's just good to see, some solid names and fights being put together by a company other than Top Rank, which continues to do their twice a week shows on ESPN. And
then they're going to go once a week through August, which is brilliant. What an undertaking by Bob, frankly, to keep this going. It's incredible.
Yeah, well, they're still doing two events a week in the month of
July. Yeah.
Now they asked for, the way that it works in America is if you're going to do fights in Nevada, for example, you have to make the date request with the commission, and they do their agendas for the meetings that they hold, a week or so ahead of time. And so for the next meeting where they're going to, assign the requested dates that were made for the month of August, Top Rank is asking for one show per week during that month. That doesn't mean they couldn't potentially add additional dates, but at the very least, they're looking at 4 more shows in August, not to mention the twice a week shows they've already got planned for the month of July. So it's going to be a lot of fights, whether they're big ones or if they're competitive or they're good fights, that's a different story. But the point is there's still going to be activity there.
I've got to give a big shout out and just brush my hair back to our biggest fan, Bill Kaplan.
I got to adjust my glasses.
There you go. And I'm just going to put my hair back one more time there, who's been counting our physical ticks during these shows.
Our biggest fan, Gareth. He watches all of our shows.
All of our shows. Bill Kaplan, of course, if people don't know, he's a great friend of ours, goes back in boxing. It's at least 50 years. He was manager, of course, and PR guy, not manager, PR guy to George Foreman Bill is one of our great friends in the boxing world he's got more stories than Rudyard Kipling, basically, isn't he? You know?
I've known Bill my entire career.
Yeah.
I've called him pretty much since I met him. It's not like just a joke. I do this every time we speak. We're in an email. If I talk to him on the phone, he's Uncle Bill. He calls me Danny Boy. I've known him 20 plus years. And like you said, he was George Foreman's publicist. He's been a ring announcer. I think he's been a referee.
Yeah.
You know, he served as Bob Arum's PR person for many, many, many years. He still is with and has been for forever with Golden Boy and Oscar De La Hoya.
Yeah. He's one of the greats.
He also has done a lot of publicity and is very close to Mauricio Suleiman from the WBC. But Bill is a boxing lifer, and we love him. Yeah,
exactly. Here's my nod to Bill right there.
There you go, Bill.
There we go. Just going back to Cecilia Braekhus for a moment, and what you said just now, maybe the greatest active female fighter. I think they're very close to sorting out Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, by the way, for one of the matchroom cards. That's very exciting. And if Katie Taylor can come through Amanda Serrano, a 7-weight world champion, if I'm right, maybe a 5-weight world. No, it's 7, isn't it?
I believe it's 7. Yes.
It's either 5 or 7-weight world.
It's either 6 or 7. It's a lot. It's a lot. And the thing that's interesting about Serrano and what she has done, most people that in boxing who win a lot of different titles in various weight classes, you know, in men's boxing, anyway, they go up the scale. Manny Pacquiao from flyweight to junior middleweight. You know, De La Hoya from junior lightweight up to junior middleweight. And, you know, those are the types of moves that the guys make. So Amanda has won a lot of her titles by dropping down in weight.
Yeah.
Winning your weight class, moving down. You know, currently, you know, not only has Serrano been doing that sort of move to win her additional titles, but you look at Claressa Shields. She started out winning a world title at super middleweight. Then she went down and she became undisputed at middleweight. Now she's got belts at 154. So she's moved down the scale also. But Serrano, look, to me, Serrano and Taylor, I hope they get their issues sorted out. It was on, it's off. Now it appears off. Hopefully they can put it back together for whenever it can take place. But I'm not the hugest women's boxing fan, but that's a boxing match that I'm very interested in because both of those really, you know, they come to fight. They're talented and they're hungry and they're just very evenly matched, it seems, in my book.
Well, on that note, and it's a difficult one for Taylor, but there is talk about Taylor and Braekhus if Taylor can win this one. So
you have to go up and weight.
I know it's lightweight, welterweight, isn't it? Taylor also being lightweight and Cecilia welterweight. But very often with the women, as you well know, it's not like a lot of men are underweight when they fight, like as normal human beings and civilians. A light heavyweight often walks around at 200 pounds as a natural civilian, not as a professional fighter. But the women don't tend to balloon up so big. So Braekhus is probably not naturally much more than a welterweight. And so it's probably possible for those two to meet at light welter, you know.
Another reason for that, though, if you ask me, is because in women's boxing, the universe of quality athletes is just not as large as fighters in the men's weight divisions. So if you want to make a big fight and you're a male fighter, yes, obviously many times they'll move up in weight to find that bigger name or the bigger purse. But in women's boxing, you know, it's up or down because there's in your own weight class, typically it's very hard to find a quality competition. And also many more of the top fighters in the weight classes in women's boxing fight each other. And so they're looking for other names to face, where in men's boxing, unfortunately, you know, you can go years and years where you don't face your number one challenger or your obvious rival. But, you know, for the women to make, you know, real money, you know, and to give.
You've got to put the names together. You've got to put the names together. Yeah.
Got to put them together. So Katie against Braekhus, that's why there's also, I mean, I don't think it's going anywhere at this point, but there was a conversation about Braekhus going up a few pounds and fighting Claressa Shields. Who's
too big in my view.
You're probably right, but that doesn't mean they couldn't make the fight because somebody wants to make a big event and make some money. I mean, look, Christy years ago went all the way up and fought Layla Ali. Chris was at her best as a 140 pound female boxer. Layla Ali, you know, 168, and Christy at the end of her career on way up because they were the two biggest names in the sport. Christy, you know, got destroyed in that fight, but she had the heart and the stones to go up there and do it. And now Christy Martin is going into the Hall of Fame.
And while we're on it, so I urge people to go and read my interview with Franchon Cruz Dezurn the WBO and WBC 12-stone, 168-pound champion, who gave me a brilliant interview last week, by the way, about Black Lives Matters in America. It's on my Twitter feed. It's really worth reading. She's a beautiful person and a great spokesperson for women's sport, for Black Lives Matter, and for human beings, frankly. And I'll never forget. I mean, I fell in love with her, Dan, the day she fought Claressa Shields in that Hagler Hearns war on the undercard of Amir Khan and Canelo. And yeah,
Was that the card?
no, sorry, it was Kovalev and
Kovalev
Ward 2.
The thing that was interesting about
Kovalev
that was
and Ward 1, sorry, it was.
Yes, Kovalev Ward 1, that they were both making their pro debuts.
Correct.
I mean, and they've become two of the best women in boxing.
No question. And you know, Franchon was on American Idol as well. She was a singer. She makes clothes. But the funny thing was, the reason I fell in love with her was because she had that fight, and those two literally went. I think it was a 6-rounder or 4-rounder.
It was a barn burner for sure.
And it stole the show, didn't it? It stole the show. But half an hour later, she was in her heels, all dressed up with her makeup
with her
hair, her husband and all their friends, and off they were out clubbing. And you know that corridor we come down where the media room is, and you know where we leave from the T-Mobile Arena. There she was, 7 or 8 of them, all going out clubbing in, I don't know, in the Cosmopolitan or something, and I had a chat to her. And the transformation, that's what I love about the women as well. Yeah. The ego is not there in the same way. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and by the way, she spars regularly with her husband, Glenn. Her husband is a professional boxer, also in a smaller weight than she, but they are married professional boxers. That is not a common thing. I don't know of any other husband and wife combination where they're both sides of the marriage are both professional boxers, and on top of that, they spar with each other.
She lives just down the road, or she was born just down the road from you.
I don't know where she was born. I believe
Virginia Beach.
Okay, well, she lives in the. I think she lives in the Baltimore area.
She's Baltimore now, but she grew up in Virginia Beach. Yeah.
Well, I'm actually where I live is much closer to Baltimore than Virginia Beach. For me to go to Baltimore is only like an hour and 20 minutes, maybe even a little less. But Virginia Beach further south. But yes, in terms of women's boxing, there are some interesting fights and some interesting names that they can make events with.
And finally, as I tooth comb our first few words on this episode, Virgil Ortiz. Now, not a lot of people who are, let's say, people that come to the mainstream fights that happen that know perhaps the top 20 names in boxing that everybody knows of, you know, globally. Mm-hmm. Virgil Ortiz. Let's just tooth comb him a little bit, because this is a guy, we know how powerful the welterweight division is, don't we? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Terence Crawford, Errol Spence, Kell Brook, Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, who am I missing? Manny Pacquiao. You know, Keith Thurman. There's a list of 6 or 7. This guy is that far away from belonging with all of them, isn't he?
He just needs experience right now. I mean, look, I had him as my prospect of the year in 2020. It wasn't really a hard decision to make. You know, he's very young. He's barely 21 years old or so. You know, he's trained by Robert Garcia. So he's got, you know, he's promoted by Golden Boy. He's got good backing.
He's trained by a lunatic is what you mean.
Well, say that if you want.
A lovely lunatic.
Yes, true. Extremely exciting, massive power. I'll tell you about Virgil Ortiz. He used to be trained by Joel Diaz earlier in his career. And I remember talking to Joel at a press conference that I was at in Las Vegas, and we were talking about Ortiz. I was doing some kind of story about him, I guess. And he had some clips of some of his sparring on his phone, and he showed me some of the footage. This was a kid at the time. He might have been like 18 years old, and he was sparring with Lucas Matisse, you know, a very well-respected former world champion, big punching power, you know, fought everybody, and showed me some video of that. And, you know, Virgil was taken to Matisse and dropped Matisse, right. You know, as a real sturdy guy and a top pro. The point is, Virgil was sparring with that caliber of guy for years and was doing extremely well, or, you know, even getting the better of it in those sparring sessions. That's as a young kid. He hasn't even gotten his man strength yet. That was back when he was a 140-pounder. Then he moved up to 147. Now, I'll give you an example. You probably saw this fight because it was on a big show when he knocked out Mauricio Herrera. Now, Herrera you know, granted, he's on a slightly journeymanish type stature at this point. A lot of people thought he beat Danny Garcia for the junior welterweight title. You know, he kind of got a raw deal in that decision. But here's the point, though. Mauricio Herrera had some losses in his career, for sure. He never got stopped before. And Virgil Ortiz just blew him up in 2 rounds. I mean, just a devastating knockout. That's the kind of power this guy has. If you put Virgil Ortiz in the ring right now with any of those welterweights that you just named, I'm not saying he's going to necessarily beat them, but they're real fights against Errol Spence, against Manny Pacquiao, against Keith Thurman, against Sean Porter, any of those guys, against Terrence Crawford. Again, he may not win those fights because he doesn't have that experience yet, but those fellas are going to know they were in a fight that night if he ever.
Well, they'll already be watching him. That's the point. They know this is. You know, we've mentioned 2 today: Martinez and Virgil Ortiz, who are definitely to watch out for when things return to the new normal and crowds return. They could become real fan favorites live. Those 2, you know,
most definitely.
Look, so earlier on today from Portugal, I had a chat with a few other journos here in the UK with Dillian Whyte. And this is a really important, he's an important cog in, or a pawn, let's say, or one of the pieces in this very complex chess game that's going on with the belts in the heavyweight division right now. And in many ways, he is emblematic of what's sometimes wrong about the heavyweight division in very, very big money fights. And his situation epitomizes what goes on and how boxers can be affected by the greed of the sport at times, and the greed of life, I would say, not just the sport, it's the greed in life. And it often leads to pitfalls in the way things are run. I think it's 1,000 days when he fights Alexander Povetkin at Matchroom Square Garden in the back on the 15-acre lawns of Matchroom headquarters in Brentwood, Essex, just down the road here. It's 1,000 years since, 1,000 days rather. It feels like 1,000.
Feels like 1,000 years.
Years, yeah. Since he had the right to challenge for Deontay Wilder for the WBC title. Now, it's clearly wrong what's happened. They are trying to make reparations. He got his date by February, but now we've had the pandemic, which will probably lock us down for 9 months without a crowd. Dillian has told us today he's prepared to have 2 fights behind closed doors in this time if he has to. He's got Sasha Povetkin, a very dangerous fight on August the 22nd. And Dillian was making the point that he's fought more top 10 WBC fighters than Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder in the last 1,000 days.
I'd have to go and actually look at the ratings and count, but his point is...
I haven't checked on that, but it's probably fairly accurate.
I was going to say, he's fought a lot of quality opponents. I can't tell you specifically where they were rated in the WBC, and likewise with the opponents that Deontay Wilder has faced. Obviously, that's the case for Tyson because Tyson Fury's only had, you know, a few fights since his long layoff after the Klitschko fight. He's only had, 4 fights, right? He had the 2 comeback fights and then the 2, he's had 6 fights, if I'm not mistaken. He had the comeback against Safari, against Pianetta. That set him up for the first Wilder fight. Then he had the Schwartz fight and the
Wallin fight.
And the second Wilder fight. So of those 6 opponents, you know, only Wilder, you know, was a top-rated guy. He was the champion of the WBC at the time. So obviously Whyte has faced more of those level opponents than Fury has, although Fury was facing Wilder, who was the champion at the time. But anyway, yeah, no, look, Dillian Whyte is an aggrieved party. There's no doubt about it. And I you know, it's very disheartening that to see a guy to put in that kind of effort to take on the caliber opponents that you want to see him fight as a fan, as a journalist, as a sanctioning body, because he's fighting guys in their ratings. You get to a position where now you're the #1 contender, and they won't order the fight. They, you know, look, I'm not big on seeing guys stripped of titles. I don't like seeing that happen. You want to see the fights that are appropriate, that you want to see as far as fans go. But Dillian Whyte is in a situation where 2 things are in his favor. He is the mandatory as the interim champion now, and he's not a manufactured mandatory. He's a guy that earned the position. He's exciting. He's fought quality guys. If you're a boxing fan, yes, I know your #1 fight you want to see in heavyweight boxing is Fury versus Anthony Joshua. But are you telling me that fans wouldn't also be interested to see Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua against Dillian Whyte? Of course they would.
Of course they would. They're great fights.
Of course. So
and Deontay Wilder against Dillian Whyte, by the way.
Sure.
That's a great fight. Imagine the build-up. The build-up's going to be amazing, those two at it. You know they're not going to like each other face-to-face.
I just know that you're talking about a guy that is, again, all due respect to our friend Mauricio Suleiman, Dillian Whyte has been royally screwed by the WBC. Yes, he's got the interim title, but he hasn't gotten that legacy kind of fight. And frankly, that kind of fight, I mean, he's making good money now, but not like millions and millions that he would get for the title fight.
Yeah. So, look, so there's a couple of other things that he said as well that I'm going to bring up just now. But so it's been announced kind of tentatively. Sorry, it's been tentatively penciled today, and people have written as a story, but it ain't concrete. It's simply not concrete. They are looking at December the 19th potentially for the trilogy fight between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. Let's say Bob's right, and you can get.
It's in a very light pencil.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very light pencil. It's a 2 or whatever it is rather than a 6. But they can't really tell fans to get in an arena and be 3 seats apart everywhere. Once they start drinking and celebrating, it's not going to work. So we need them to agree that crowds can come back. I don't even think it works with 20,000 people wearing masks either. I just don't think it works.
Gareth, I don't think anybody, whether it's boxing or any other sport or any other activity, and when I say that, I mean a political rally, a concert, any type of activity that requires a large number of people, especially indoors. So, I don't think anybody can say it can happen in November, it can happen in December, it can happen in January. They simply don't know. You have to allow time to see what's actually occurring in real time in terms of the number of cases. Look, in the United States, it's a disaster. People locked down for X period of time, and then states started to, slowly reopen certain elements of their businesses and economy, et cetera. But they didn't actually follow the federal guidelines of how many cases you needed to see per day where it would be okay to then reopen. Everybody just went from like step 1 to like step 5 and skipped all the stuff in the middle. And now the cases are skyrocketing. And if I'm not mistaken, I saw a story in, one of the New York Times or USA Today or Wall Street Journal or whatever, where the number of cases on that day was the most in that day of the entire pandemic. Now that people can say, okay, that's because they're testing more, but whatever, there's still a lot of cases and it's going up, not down, and that's a problem. And so to say that there's gonna be crowds at any of these events, boxing or otherwise, is farcical.
So it leads me on to my next point, which is almost regardless of what happens, Whyte is not going to get a title fight at the WBC title earliest April, May next year. Okay, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what's going to be then.
So no, but here's the point. The other point he made today, and this is the really valid point, and he stuck his dog's bollocks on the line to do this. Okay, he's fighting arguably the most dangerous, most experienced, most decorated opponent of his career outside the fight with Anthony Joshua before he was world champion, okay? If he loses it, all the house of cards crumbles for him. And the problem for Mauricio Suleiman and Eddie Hearn and Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury goes away. But what he said was this: it's about time all these guys realized, what happens if this virus is around for months and months and years here? We need to get on. We got over Spanish flu. We get over flu. We get over boxers fighting 50 rounds or 15-round fights. You change and adapt. I'm going to have 2 fights behind closed door if I have to. It's about time Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury, and Anthony Joshua all said, look, we'll take the cut. We'll take the cut in the purse. The sport must go on. The show must go on. We'll agree to a date behind closed doors. And he made the best point I've heard from any heavyweight during the pandemic. Anthony Joshua said it earlier on, I'll take an £8 million or $8 million cut to fight behind closed doors. More of them need to get on the bandwagon and say, the sport has to carry on. We need to get this done. And if that was to happen, and Wilder and Fury said, fine, December 19, we'll do Vegas behind closed doors, it's fine. Or we'll do it wherever you want us to do it. Behind closed doors, where the lighting is the best, where the walkouts can be best, where we can put on a kind of show, where it can be exposed with cameras underneath the canvas, or just something very different, you know, that makes it televisually spectacular. Ditto for Anthony Joshua and Kubrat Pulev. We can get this show on the road again.
I agree with that. I mean, I know this. It's one thing for a guy like a Fury or a Wilder or a Joshua to say, you know, they'll take a pay cut, because good for them. They've made tens of millions of dollars. You know, between the three guys, they're way over $100 million in earnings. You know, way over that in terms of recent fights. I mean, Fury and Wilder alone, you know, $25 million or so for the most recent fight. Now, look, it's their decision to make. I'm not going to tell anybody to you know, what they believe they should make. You know, they got to do what you got to do and what you believe is right for your career. But they're boxers. They fought for very small purses when they started. They fought for zero when they were amateurs. It's not like anybody's asking them to fight for free. They're just have to understand, as do the fans and the promoters and the managers, that it's a new sort of economic way of doing things. And if it calls for a cut and you still want to have your career, that's life. Now, I can understand if you've never made big money, why you'd be reticent to take a pay cut. I get that, particularly because some of these boxers have agreements that call for a certain amount of dollar figures with promoters who would then look to cut the money, understandably, because there is no additional revenue from, you know, the gate that they would put up. With TV networks are not going to be paying over what they've already promised. Some might want to look to cut also. So it's a complicated situation, but I'm going to go back to when we've talked about this before, to the original statement that was made on this topic by Bob Arum. And it was in relation to Terrence Crawford, who made a comment that he felt like he should be paid more if there's no fans behind closed doors, which, again, you know, Crawford's entitled to his opinion. I just find that to be just kind of weird, because
no, it's not weird. It's ludicrous, Dan. It's ludicrous.
So, but Arum said the following. He said, look, if Crawford doesn't want to fight for what we can offer, I'm not mad. That's fine. That's his prerogative.
It's fine.
He doesn't make him a bad guy, but next man up. And if they don't want to take the fights, and somebody else is going to be there to take their place, period, end of story.
But that's down to the sanctioning body then to say, look, if you're not going to fight, exit the title. You can come back afterwards, and then we'll just get on with the title. Because at the moment, the only way that we will see, and I think with people locked down, I think there is more general interest, you know, in many ways. People, all the people that would travel to the events aren't going to be able to travel, of course. They're not going to be able
they'll stay home and watch.
But there's ways of, you know, we've seen really entertaining things on Zoom. We've seen really entertaining things with two guys. I mean, sometimes the build-up is even better when they're not standing next to each other, because they'll say more. I think at some point in the next 2 to 3 months, these decisions will have to be made, because one of the problems that we face with the very, very big money fights in the sport, and I do think it's a problem, and we accept it because we're in the sport and we're insiders, is that you do accept, and there's so many cases of it, the history of 11, 12, 13, 14 months between two fighters having their second and third fight, or their first and second fight.
It's just bizarre. I mean,
it is bizarre.
Pandemic aside, I mean, obviously there's inactivity level because of the pandemic. It makes sense. Guys can't be as active. But even pre-pandemic, it was just so disheartening to see the best fighters fighting once or twice a year. How can you become a megastar in your sport, beyond your sport, if you only perform once or twice a year? The reason why LeBron James can become a megastar, obviously basketball is very popular in the United States and around the world, but they play 82 games, and he plays in virtually every single one of those games. So we'll have a chance to see him night in and night out. And that's the same with a top football player. They play 17 games plus the playoffs. Baseball players play, over 160 games. But in boxing, you're fighting twice a year. Now go back and look at some of the greats. Look at the amount of time that went past when Iron Mike Tyson was in his heyday. He was heavyweight champion. He was like the biggest name, not just in boxing, but in sports in the whole world practically. Guy was fighting sometimes, every 3 or 4 months as champion. Oscar De La Hoya in 1997, who was the #1 star in the sport, fought 5 times title fights in 1 calendar year. That does not happen anymore. I mean, now it's like, if a guy fights twice, it's like, wow, he fought twice. If he fought 3 times, like, oh my God, he fought 3 times. Heaven forbid a guy fights 4 times.
Yeah, it's Dillian Whyte, for someone who's been in that situation, I've got a sneaky feeling when he does, if he beats Alexander Povetkin, I've got a sneaky feeling that Dillian Whyte is going to win the world title against one of these guys and upset me because they've given him the opportunity to get better and better and better. Dan, I'm going to cut you off there. And on our next show,
I got one more thing to say though. One more thing to say.
Yeah.
I know that Povetkin is a very accomplished fighter, and I've watched him a lot, and I've also watched Dillian Whyte for a long, long time. My personal viewpoint is that's not that tough of a fight for Dillian Whyte. If he's in the right kind of condition, he should take care of Povetkin relatively easily. I'm not saying he's going to knock him out in one round, but it should be, you know, a pretty comprehensive victory for him.
Yeah, he's got a great chin, not lots of miles on the clock. He's got one of the best left hooks in boxing, if not the best, actually. You know,
Povetkin is a little worn out past his prime.
He's a little bit robotic.
He's a good fighter, but he's not what he was at his best. And even at his best, he wasn't the best.
But he's going to have to watch those little traps that Povetkin sets early to set up his leaping left hook and his ins and outs that Anthony Joshua had problems with. Dan, on the next show, we're going to answer all the questions that people threw at us today.
Perfect.
It's always great to see you, my friend. And,
thank you, Gary.
Yeah, and let's do another transatlantic chat just in a couple of minutes.
All right. Boom.